Welcome to part 25 of Basic Training, the weekly series where I teach you how to play every track in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about Wario Stadium on 150cc. The reason that I'm so incredulous is that when I said DK Jungle was my worst track in the game in the last video, I totally forgot about how god-awful I used to be at this track. Speaking of DK Jungle, if you watched that video, you might remember that I mentioned that there's this weird mid-air release and repressing of the drift button to do some mid-air course correction. You might also remember, not only that, but because it has so many sections where you need to master mechanics that aren't found on any other course, it's one of the least useful courses to time trial. Ironically enough, that very mechanic is key to learning how to play Wario Stadium, as two of the advanced strategies require this mid-air course correction to make them work. Real quick, before we get into the video, I'm messing around with putting an input display on the screen. Unfortunately, there's no way to capture my inputs in real time without modding my Switch, and my Switch is patched so it's unmoddable. What I did instead was use the input display at gamepadviewer.com, replay my ghost back, and tried my best to mimic the inputs that you're seeing on screen. The point is, the inputs probably won't sync up perfectly with what's happening on screen, but hopefully they're close enough to give you a good idea of what I'm actually doing when I'm playing the track. Also, before anybody mentions it, the website doesn't have a Switch overlay as far as I could tell, hence the Xbox display. And last thing, if you do enjoy the video, please do me a favor and drop a like on it, since it really does help it get spread to other people like yourself who are looking to improve at the game. Anyways, that's enough of that. Without further ado, let's jump into the guide, starting with the recommended build. The build that I recommend for this track is going to be Wario, Ink Striker, Rollers, and Gold Glider. This build places a pretty high emphasis on speed over Mini Turbo, and it's the build that was used in all of the world records up until pretty much like a month ago. The current world record uses the usual try-hard build of Waluigi, Bitty Buggy, Azure Rollers, and Paper Glider, which gives a much higher emphasis on Mini Turbo. I'll get into why the recent shift a bit later on in the video, but first, let's check out the strats. One of the things that makes Wario Stadium so difficult to play is that there are 3 sections of the track where you'll encounter multiple orange boost ramps, one right after the other. The first set is what I'll be calling the Mudpatch ramps. The second set I'm going to be calling the Fire Loop ramps, and the last set is, well, the final ramps. The strats that I'm about to go over are pretty much all required to get a good time, and the first orange boost ramp also has its own kind of annoying strategy. But just getting this out of the way early, if you're only interested in beating the Staff Ghost, then the track is pretty straightforward, and all you need to do is just trick off all the ramps like you're seeing me do in this clip here. Presumably though, you're here for some of the advanced stuff, so let's walk through my current personal best in detail. After getting the startup boost, immediately start a left drift. Try and stay as close to the wall as possible, and then after building up a Super Mini Turbo, release the drift and start another left drift while grabbing the 4 coins. Build up another Super Mini Turbo, and then a little bit before you get to the orange boost ramp, start a wide left drift, grabbing the coin on the right while tricking off the ramp. Then you should land in a left drift, which will allow you to take a really good line around the next turn. After that, prepare for the first of 3 ridiculously painful strats. The idea with the Mudpatch ramps is to build up a Mini Turbo while going over the ramps and then releasing after going off the 3rd ramp. The only ramp we actually want to trick off is the last one. In order to do this strategy, we're going to first need to do 2 right hops into a left drift, landing right on top of the first orange boost ramp. Keep holding left until after grabbing the coin on ramp 2, at which point start holding a hard right until you build up a Mini Turbo, which should happen right around the time you get to ramp 3. You want to hold this drift until after going off the 3rd ramp, because once we release the Mini Turbo, we're going to have to rapidly tap the drift button again in midair while still holding right so that we can straighten ourselves out a bit before getting to the 4th ramp. And then we're going to finish up the strategy by tricking off the 4th ramp, which once again is the only ramp we want to actually trick off of. Now if you tap the drift button too quickly, you'll end up tricking off the 3rd ramp instead, which is going to screw up your line. One thing to point out is that by my estimation, this strat saves less than 1/10 of a second per lap over just tricking. So in the grand scheme of things, probably not what you need to be spending your time stressing about when you're first learning this course. Trust me, the worst is yet to come. After tricking off the 4th ramp, take the next turn as tightly as possible while neutral drifting to maximize your speed before the Fire Loop ramps. What you want to do is right drift off the 1st ramp, build up a Mini Turbo, and then left drift off the 2nd ramp, building up a Super Mini Turbo after landing. There's a lot going on with the strategy, so let's break it down in detail. Before making your way fully around the bend, start holding right on the joystick to widen your drift angle. When you're finally on the straightaway, right hop to release your Mini Turbo and then do a left hop into a right drift off the first orange boost ramp. You might need to hold left on the joystick just a little bit to correct your angle when going off that ramp. Now once you get in midair, keep holding down a hard right just until you build up a mini turbo, and then release and rapidly do the inputs to start a left drift in midair. Keep holding down a hard left and you should be able to build up a super mini turbo soon after landing, at which point you'll release and grab the coins. This strategy saves at least a third of a second over tricking off all the ramps, which amounts to about a second over the course of a full run. And while it is difficult to learn, it's somewhat consistent, so I definitely recommend trying to figure out. Question is, why is this so much faster than tricking? As far as I can tell, there are 3 reasons. The first is that you spend less time in the air. The second is that typically when tricking off the first ramp, you'll land on top of the second ramp, and the boost from that ramp will cannibalize your trick boost. The third reason is that the fire loop ramp strats give you a super mini turbo after the second ramp, which is much more powerful than the trick boost that you'd normally get. Now moving on, after grabbing the 2 coins, prepare for the only actual right turn on the entire track. You want to try and take a tight line to hop over the corner here, which will save about a tenth of a second or so, but it's somewhat risky to go for. After that, build up a mini turbo around the next turn, right hop out of it to release the drift, and then trick off the ramp while holding left so that you can take a tight line around the turn before the final set of orange boost ramps. Just before getting around the bend, start holding right to widen your drift angle, and what you want to do is approach this first ramp in such a way that you go off the left edge of it while holding right. Then, after going off the first ramp, we're going to yet again do the DK Jungle midair course correction strats by releasing and rapidly tapping the drift button. Again, making sure to delay this tap long enough so that you can avoid tricking off the ramp. Keep holding right all the way until just before you land, and then start holding down the drift button and left on the joystick so that you can land in a left drift. Now, and this is the most important part, immediately upon landing, start holding a hard right on the joystick to avoid being flung into the wall on the left-hand side of the track. Keep holding right past the third ramp and into the water, and when you land, you should be able to take a tight line around the final turn of the lap while using your mushroom through the shortcut. Then just build up an ultra mini turbo and do some glider vectoring to finish up the lap. The strategies for the final 3 ramps are probably the hardest part of the run. If you're focusing on all the individual inputs, it seems like it should be impossible because you're having to rapidly tap and release the drift button while moving the joystick back and forth from left to right, and it's a lot to keep track of. It's easier to think about this in terms of the fact that basically what you're trying to do is wide left drifts off all 3 ramps, making sure to just do some midair course correction between ramps 1 and 2. Regardless, this is definitely going to take some time to learn, but it's super worth it. The ramp strats alone are going to save you about a third of a second per lap in comparison to just tricking off the 3 ramps, but if that weren't enough, these strategies set you up in a really good line for the mushroom cut, and they allow you to build up an ultra mini turbo instead of a super mini turbo after the mushroom cut. So at the end of the day, these strats are going to save you almost a full second on every lap. So yeah, definitely tough, but so worth it. Now before checking out a full run, let's talk a bit about the current world record. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, they use the usual tryhard build of Waluigi, Bitty Buggy, Azure Rollers, and Paper Glider. This build has lower speed but higher mini turbo than my build, and actually plays the track really similar to my current PB, except with 2 differences. The first is that on the left turn in the anti-grav section, they actually build up a super mini turbo instead of a regular mini turbo. The second difference is that on the first turn of laps 2 and 3, they build up an ultra mini turbo instead of a super mini turbo. These differences, coupled with the fact that we do actually build up a decent amount of mini turbos throughout the rest of the run, actually allowed the Waluigi build to beat the previous world record by just 0.006 seconds. Now, if there are any saving graces to this course, it's that the strategies for laps 1, 2, and 3 are exactly the same, so let's talk a bit more about the track while checking out my full personal best. While we load up the track, just a quick reminder that if the video has been helpful to you thus far, please don't forget to drop a like since it does help the video get spread to other racers like yourself looking to improve with the game. And with that out of the way, I've already sort of covertly whined about how hard this track is, so let's make it a little bit more explicit. This track absolutely sucks to learn. In particular, all 3 sets of orange boost ramps came very close to giving me an aneurysm, and all for different reasons. For the Mudpatch ramps, once you get the setup, it's not super hard to avoid going into the mud, but it can still happen from time to time. The final set of orange boost ramps also really isn't so bad once you got the muscle memory for it, because even if you do mess up the setup, drifting off the ramps is still going to end up being faster than tricking. It's the second set of orange boost ramps with the flame loops that are just awful. The setup isn't super complicated, but I've lost enough good runs by running into the fireballs on lap 3, or missing the second boost ramp altogether, that it does at least deserve a mention. And again, even if you are able to get all the setups correct, there's still a decent chance that the drift off the second ramp will just decide not to work. Generally this happens when you don't start the second drift ahead enough of when you land, but I've had situations where I swear that I did everything correctly and the drift just never happened for seemingly no apparent reason. And I really can't begin to explain just how frustrating that feels when you've pretty much gotten everything else down. Now I know that I've spent the last couple minutes whining, so let's end on a more positive note here. I do have to say that this used to be one of my least favorite tracks in the game, but after spending so much time grinding it out, well, I still hate it, but I can appreciate it for its difficulty in some twisted masochistic sort of way. And if nothing else, it at least makes me appreciate DK Jungle more because I can guarantee that had I not learned the ramp strats on that course, there is no way that I would have figured out the Mudpatch ramps or the last 3 ramps. In all honesty though, I do have an affinity for tracks that are difficult because they consistently keep your hands busy, especially in comparison to tracks where the difficulty is more or less contained in a single inconsistent shortcut. And from that perspective, I've got to say that now that I actually have somewhat of a decent handle on the strats, the course is pretty fun to time trial. And that's everything you need to know about Wario Stadium on 150cc. This has definitely been one of the more technically challenging courses that I've tried to learn, and there's really not any point in the run at which you can take a breather. Fortunately, most of the strats are consistent, and I never really felt like I was getting screwed out of good runs too much. Except again for the fire loop ramps. Now before we finish up, I just wanted to give a quick plug for a couple things I got going on. I started the Discord server as sort of a gathering place for people who enjoy my content. It's totally free and I'm going to try and be pretty active there as the server grows, so I've got a link to it in the description if you're interested in checking that out. I'm also starting the YouTube membership program back up again, and if you either become a YouTube member or subscribe to my Twitch, you'll get access to an exclusive channel in that server while I'll post my videos a few days in advance and do raffles for naming my time trial ghosts. Plus, you know, it helps support the channel, which is always very much appreciated. But that's going to be it for me for today, everyone. If you found the video helpful or informative, again, don't forget to drop a like because it really does help me out. And also let me know down in the comments if and how much time you're able to save using the strategies that I outline in this video. I myself was able to drop my PB by more than 5 seconds, so I'm really hoping that you can all get some use out of this as well. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to do some basic training, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.